I want to show you a clip from Joe Rogan that highlights the power of the Democrat brand.
Like, no.
Yeah. You know who's like super deep into politics on the right is Nick DiPaolo. Like every time I talk to him,
yeah,
he wants to talk about the fucking Steele dossier. Yeah. Wants to talk about all the shit Obama did. How about when Obama did this? Like,
yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah.
How do you even know this?
I know.
Yeah, he was always an angry guy, but he became like an old angry guy that's really into politics as he got older.
Yeah.
Here, Joe Rogan demonstrates the power of Democrat branding, and this Democrat brand is perhaps one of the great overlooked allies of the left. Despite a plethora of rage and disgusting behavior, the left has managed to maintain this false brand image as a peaceful party who just want us all to get along, while the political right is the opposite, a bunch of people filled with anger, rage, and hate. Major publications push this narrative all the time. What are Donald Trump's angry voters so angry about? They push propaganda like this because that's the brand. Democrats peaceful and kind, Republicans angry and hateful. Just before the 2016 election, The Week magazine published this image predicting what will happen when Hillary Clinton wins the 2016 election. Take a good look at it because this image perfectly illustrates the brand image of conservatives that Democrats constantly like to portray. But also consistent with the left is the obvious transference or projection of the worst aspects of themselves onto others. Ironically, this image is a somewhat accurate depiction of the post-election hysteria if only the people in the image were leftists. But the fact that Democrats are treated as this brand of peaceful and nonviolent do-gooders demonstrates the power of the Democrat brand. But like most forms of advertising, cementing the brand image requires repetition. So we see it over and over again. Hate, anger, hate, rage, anger, hate. Love trumps hate. Make America hate again. Hate has no home here. Hate speech, hate crimes, hate, 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 hate. How many times have you heard the left describe themselves as fighting hate or against hate? No matter how awful the left behaves, they are never hateful or filled with rage. They can't be. That's not the brand image. They are peaceful and tolerant. They create beautiful art depicting how we should just all get along. What in the world would make you think that they are angry and hateful people? While Trump is out there spewing hateful rhetoric, the left takes the high road, showering us all with love and compassion. Ah, yes. Can you feel the warmth radiating from their masterworks of art? But where are all these kind, friendly, and peaceful leftists, which Joe Rogan is certain is hardwired into the DNA of every Democrat? Tell me which left-wing identity group seems like the happy-go-lucky people. Do feminists come off as happy people? Seriously, do they? Do these feminists seem like they're happy, pleasant people? Or are they angry, bitter, rage-filled malcontents? What about Black Lives Matter? Are they happy people? Or maybe Antifa? Surely they are friendly people who just want us all to get along. Are the countless acts of rage and violence aimed at Trump supporters for brandishing MAGA hats or MAGA shirts or MAGA signs the behavior of happy, friendly people?
The Democrats have decided that they are going to look as ugly and terrible as humanly possible in public as often as possible. It's so funny because the Democrats, after losing to President Trump, decided that what they really needed to do was be more off-putting. They look at President Trump and they see that his popularity ratings are in the low 40s, and they thought, well, you know what? If we could imitate that but do it worse, right? So we won't have the kind of blue-collar appeal of President Trump. We won't have the sort of personal charisma of President Trump. We'll just be insanely off-putting and terrible all the time. Maybe that will win us power again. And it doesn't seem like it is working.
All right.
Fuck the police.
What is it?
Fuck the police.
All right.
Fuck the police.
Say it. Can you do that? Everybody hearing yourself, all right?
Fuck the
All right.
police.
Power to the people. Power to the people. Thanks, kids.
Don't get
That clip showed up on social media with the note, "White lives don't matter."
Why are you? We're on your side! We're
keep the Democrat brand image intact, the media have to lie at every turn. They have to be careful about their language. The last thing they want is for Americans to realize the left is an angry group who resents that Americans have enough freedom to oppose them. So whenever the left reveals their true character, the left-wing media works hard on damage control.
So you have this conflict that is now happening, this gaslighting that is happening, where Democrats are openly stating, that they are in favor of mob politics, that they are fine with mob politics. They are fine with people showing up at restaurants and yelling at people. They are fine with people trying to beat down the 13-ton bronze doors at the Supreme Court.
They're being made out to be violent and disruptive.
I mean, it really wasn't a mob.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite.
And then you have folks in the media saying, no, Democrats aren't saying that. There are no mobs. That's not real. Why would you think that the mob stuff is real?
That's happening in Portland right now? There's riots?
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots.
I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started.
There's very little rioting. Like that's actually, there's very little violence. It's but it's magnified by Donald Trump, and it's magnified by Republicans, and it's to convince people that people are coming for them, and that's just simply not what's happening.
Over at CNN, which is now devoted full time to covering for the rioters, one analyst tweeted that only, quote, desperate Republicans claim we have riots. Amazingly, because the person who tweeted it is not very smart, his tweet contained a photograph of a burning building. The building was burning in a riot. But whatever, ignore that. Riots aren't real. There's not much violence. You'd have to be a racist to think there was.
The Democrat mob does not like to be called a Democrat mob. And there's a reason for this. The reason is they're a Democrat mob. And so the Democrat mob does not like being called out. So, of course, who do they call upon to run interference for them? The media.
Accusing the left of being this angry, wild mob is just ridiculous.
Describing protesters as a mob doesn't fit the facts.
And it's really funny because Trump loves mobs.
There's talk of mob rule and so on. I mean, Brooke, have you been to a Trump rally?
Donald Trump over the weekend called them a mob and compared them to arsonists, calling liberals the angry, dangerous mob. And this is actually a tactic that Hitler used.
If you wait long enough, they get to Hitler. You know, what I love about this is, like, if it walks like a mob, talks like a mob, sounds like a mob, it's a mob.
There's an article in the Washington Post saying Republicans try to recast Democratic protest as mob. We don't have to recast anything. It didn't take a lot of work at all. It said something like Republicans work hard to do it. Doesn't take any work at all, because all we have to do is show you the video, show you the pictures. A lot of the anchors on CNN have dedicated themselves to the idea that the only sort of mob that's real is a mob of white supremacists in Charlottesville. It's the only mob we've seen in politics, really. We didn't see mobs in Ferguson. We didn't see mobs in Baltimore. We haven't seen mobs at the Supreme Court. We didn't see mobs at the Senate building. None of this was a mob. I mean, Occupy, those weren't mobs. The only mobs are right-wing mobs. And if you feel like people are driving you nuts, that they're gaslighting you and lying to you, that's because they are.
The real mob is a mob of white supremacists who killed a woman in Charlottesville. Killed. People who are voicing their opinion about something that they don't believe in or that they think is bad for them is how the country works. That's not a mob.
Maxine Waters, the same woman who said in front of a crowd that people should confront and get in the face of people at gas stations and restaurants, and they should harass folks in public places.
You see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome.
Now she says, well, the only real type of mob is a mob that has to do with President Trump. That's the only real kind of mob.
They're trying to change the description of protest and call it a mob. Well, this president is the poster boy for what a mob protester looks like.
This poor man got his business caught on fire. Hey, no!
There's a long history of Democrats using the mobs as political tools. See, there is this strategy. It's called Fred Siegel, who's an author of a great book called The Future Was Once Here, about major American cities destroyed by democratic liberalism. He calls it riot ideology. Riot ideology, according to Fred Siegel, is this belief that riots are a reflection of deep underlying social ills that can only be cured by more government. And what you would see from the Democrats is an attempt to actually forward mob politics, to forward the mob, to feed the braying mob, to make the mob larger, to encourage riots, and then turn around and say, look at this. This riot is happening because the people are angry. The only way to cure this is to give the people what they want, aka more government or dollars or something else. This is a tactic of the Democrats. It has been an actual tactic of Democrats for generations. Marion Barry, who ended up being mayor of Washington, D.C., he said regarding the Black Panthers, who are a violent actual terrorist group, he says, I know for a fact that white people get scared of the Panthers, and they might look at somebody a little bit more moderate and say, well, let's give them money. And so there he is supporting the mob. New York Mayor John Lindsay, who is a very, very liberal Republican, he said that mass unrest could be the spur to more leftist policies. He said, quote, our experience is that some good can come of confrontation politics. You remember when the left fully embraced the Occupy Wall Street movement, despite their crime and violence, despite the fact that they were occupying public places and turning them into pigsties? Jay Carney, the White House press secretary under Obama, said of Occupy Wall Street, quote, one man's mob is another man's democracy. You remember when Barack Obama expressed sympathy for rioters in cities ranging from Baltimore to Ferguson. In other words, riots are always an expression of public anger, so long as the public anger moves us in the direction of more government liberalism. The folks on the left have decided that any resistance to that is just because you are a privileged white person.
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, that comes from a place of privilege, that comes from a place of privilege.
But what I don't want to hear is for our constituents to be told to be civil, not to be reactionary, to be told that looting doesn't solve anything. And, you know, it does make me wonder and ask the question why looting bothers people.
They aren't mobs. They're just a group of angry and violent people. Same goes with violent rioters and criminals burning down cities. They aren't violent. They're mostly peaceful. Despite the past few years consisting of violent riots, burning down buildings, destroying monuments, and adults throwing temper tantrums en masse, somehow they're adamant that it is the Republicans who are fueled by hate. But the left has an alibi for all their hate. Their hate is simply a passion in their fight against hate. Their undirected rage and disgust for anything remotely close to conservatism is done as a defense against hate, you see. They only seem hateful and angry because the only thing they hate is hate itself. And they get very angry at Republican hate, you see. This projection of their own awfulness onto their opponents, that too is part of the Democrat brand. You must accuse before being accused. You must call yourselves anti-fascists so people dismiss the idea that you're actually fascists. And you must also leverage your own awfulness and use it against Republicans. Perhaps the pinnacle of this projection mechanism comes from MSNBC's Joy Reid, who, in the midst of the George Floyd riots, retweeted this tweet, which is an amazing example of the left deflecting their hate-filled movement onto Republicans. The chaos and violence and riots at the hands of leftists, encouraged by leftists, applauded by leftists, to the shock and disgust of conservatives, is not the fault of leftists. Nope, it's conservatives. It is merely a response to Donald Trump's hateful rhetoric. None of this would have happened if Trump hadn't projected this hate onto so many Americans, which is a really weird talking point, because if Trump was projecting hate, you'd think hate-filled conservatives would be the ones destroying cities. Wouldn't those listening and taking Donald Trump seriously be the most impacted by his infection of hate? Nope. Instead, Trump's words have incited hate that's widespread across America somehow. A white guy killing a black guy in a radically left-wing city with a radically left-wing mayor with a radically left city council, one of the most radical left-wingers in Congress, Ilhan Omar, overseeing the radically left-wing district, and a left-wing governor, and then left-wingers destroyed the city to the delight and approval of more left-wingers across America, but those responsible are not the left, but the right, because their hatred caused it all. That rationale may be absurd, but it doesn't really matter because the Democrat brand confirms it. Other lefties committed similar insane transference of their horribleness onto everyone else by posting pictures of Obama in comparison to the burning cities under the Trump presidency. even though the flames were started by leftists, you should elect Democrats anyways because they bring peaceful times. If you don't elect them, they'll destroy your city. The believers of the liberal brand are too blind to see the self-own in this imagery. All of these photos prove that conservatives are better people than leftists because conservatives don't destroy cities when they lose elections. But the believer in the liberal brand does not see it this way. They see the rage and hate of their own party, which causes destruction, as not a reflection of them, but a reflection of the current leadership, which is the right. Conservatives don't behave as terribly as leftists, therefore, we should give those behaving terribly more power and control. Got it? If the abhorrent behaviors of leftists are rewarded with power in November, then will be the actual norm. Rewarding certain behaviors brings more of those behaviors, not less. If years of rage, hate, destruction, and lies give them power, why stop? It's a winning formula. If anything, Democrats gaining power after years of rage will embolden them to be more angry than before. The left works so hard to excuse and dismiss their horrendous behavior, they even condemn the practice of civility.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about. That's why I believe if we are fortunate enough to win back the House and/or the Senate, that's when civility can start again.
No decent person is against civility, but they have to be against civility because they have to explain away all their horrible behavior. Hillary Clinton, Maxine Waters, Samantha Bee, Colin Kaepernick, and even members of Joe Biden's own staff all agree civility is white supremacy. So being civil is no longer a metric used to determine who is awful versus who is not. But what kind of people lament civility? Only those dominated by uncontrolled rage would condemn such a thing. People who condemn civility are not happy people. They're angry, hate-filled souls who want to excuse their own awful behavior towards citizens with different opinions. Do happy people applaud violence and destruction of others? Or do angry people do that? What type of people applaud when innocent people are being killed, beaten, and their communities and businesses destroyed? As far as I know, none of these people, beaten, killed, or destroyed, had anything to do with the death of George Floyd. And yet, those filled with rage celebrate it and condone it as some sort of payback for something these people never did. Only the sick and especially cruel celebrate the misery of innocent people. It's remarkable because we treat children who hurt and torture innocent animals as insane and in dire need of professional help, but when the left celebrate the destruction of other people who are innocent in this whole ordeal, it doesn't even leave a stain on their character at all. What type of people celebrate this behavior? It is not happy people or kind people. Despite the endless examples of left-wing awfulness, the power of the Democrat brand is so potent, it has still convinced them that they are not violent at all. In fact, Bette Midler thinks that they're actually too polite to other people. It's truly amazing and shocking how Democrats could possibly be construed as a group of kind, good, and decent people. They aren't. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Go ahead, I've named a bunch of groups. Which Democrats are the happy, peaceful, let's all get along type of people that their brand image portrays them as? Tell me where the joy and kindness of the left resides. Here are the facts. Conservatives are happier people. Even the New York Times admits the happiest wives by far in America are those in politically conservative religious marriages. The study found that 73% of wives who hold conservative gender values and attend religious services regularly have high-quality marriages. Another statement that may make the New York Times crazy is that women in these highly religious relationships are about 50% more likely to report that they are strongly satisfied with their sexual relationship than their less secular and less religious counterparts. Trump supporters have been violently attacked in ways that we've never seen. Trump supporters are routinely attacked, have their property vandalized or stolen, and regularly face tsunami-sized waves of vitriol. Perhaps one of the greatest examples that summarizes the left's fake brand image, which distorts the rage and hate underneath, happened when a student carrying a Trump flag was assaulted outside a high school in Minneapolis during the national school walkout against gun violence. You can't make this up. Students walked out of school to protest gun violence like they were told by left-wingers in the media that they should, and when outside the school, they violently attack a student with a Trump flag. But it is instances like this which expose the whole disingenuous charade. Their addiction to virtue signaling, self-congratulatory speeches, and lecturing of others who don't comply with their standards or demands is just a cologne that attempts to cover up their ugly stench underneath. They must let everyone see how wonderful they are, or else they might actually see what's underneath. The angry, rage-filled, hateful, resentful, bitter left-wing soul.
the great untold story of the last 25 years is that Democrats categorized every Republican as evil and nasty and bigoted and homophobic and racist and all of these terrible things. And finally, Republicans responded in 2016 by saying, you know what? Screw you too. We're done. And I have a chart to prove it. So here's a chart from Jonathan Haidt's new book about polarization in American politics. And here's what it shows. It's partisan hatred for the other party. And you will see that the lighter line, if you're watching this, you can see the lighter line shows that folks who hate the Democratic Party, Republicans who hate the Democratic Party, and the darker line shows Democrats who hate the Republican Party. What you will see is that until 2016, Democratic hate for the Republican Party was higher or equal to hate from Republicans for Democrats every year since 1980. Right? That's the actual trend line here. What you see in this trend line is that since 1980, when Ronald Reagan won election, Democratic hatred for the Republican Party skyrocketed and was significantly higher than Republican hatred for the Democrats all the way up until 1995 or so. Then they sort of drew even, and they basically are right on top of each other. And then after George W. Bush was elected, then Democratic hatred for the Republican Party skyrocketed again and remained higher. This is the part that's amazing. It remained higher than hatred for the Democratic Party by Republicans all the way until 2016, which means even after Barack Obama was elected, Democrats still hated Republicans more than Republicans hated Democrats, because for the first time, it was evident that that was the case. And the media were part of that problem. The media were forwarding that hatred. The media were cheering it on. It was the media declaring that George W. Bush was a war criminal. It was the media declaring that the Tea Party were a bunch of terrorists. It was the media declaring that the Tea Party were a bunch of mob thugocracy fans.
But this goes right to the heart of the hostility towards anything and everything that is associated with Donald Trump and his slogan, Make America Great Again. Democrats are angry and miserable. They express their rage in the streets with violence and destruction. There are too many violent acts against Trump supporters to list here, but there's a calculated reason why there is such vitriol at the sight of a MAGA hat that isn't what it seems. The success of the Democrat brand is largely dependent on being the only show in town. Alternative options are a serious threat. For decades, the left has made tremendous strides with their brand through questioning the character of anyone who does not properly align with it. Don't like Obama? You're a racist. Like Trump? You're a racist. The dominance of the Democrat brand throughout mass media and American culture has emboldened activists to pursue and destroy all dissenters, which has also protected the brand from competition. And while the left has been extremely successful in using harassment, threats, and intimidation to save and preserve their brand image, Trump is just much better at branding than the other lifelong politicians in the good graces with the GOP establishment. But they are taught to be disgusted with the MAGA or Trump's brand because it is symbolic of the left's monopoly eroding before their eyes. Seeing a MAGA hat is a sign that people are not adequately fearful of the intimidation tactics that have been successful in the past. A MAGA sign elicits the fear within every leftist who've relied on their trendiness and monopoly of good press as the glue holding their web of lies together. With every MAGA hat is the realization of the coming collapse of the liberal brand. A MAGA hat is met with rage because it strikes a subconscious realization they are not the only brand in town anymore. It strikes fear in them because the worst thing that could happen to the Democrat trendy brand is conservatives to be branded as something trendy or cool or something to be proud about. So their only recourse is to use threats, intimidation, and their own hate to prevent that from happening, to scare people to not wearing Trump branded gear. The Democrats are an enraged party. Fear, paranoia, and anger are their fuel. I don't know how that's debatable at this point. I really don't. But perhaps another obvious indicator is how Republicans speak to crowds versus how Democrats speak to crowds. A Democrat rally is filled with complaints about injustice and racism and death via uncovered healthcare costs. A Democrat Party rally is a series of complaints about the evils of other people and how terrible the country is and needs to fundamentally change by force. A Trump rally is a celebration and partly a comedic routine. Even a liberal media publication wrote about how, attending a Trump rally, they were shockingly surprised about how happy the people were there. That's because Democrats are the party of hate, misery, jealousy, a party who routinely defends the worst human beings on earth and idolize some of the most evil ideologies in human history. The only thing that assures them that they are good is the power of the Democrat brand.
The Democrats have decided that they are going to look as ugly and terrible as humanly possible in public as often as possible. It's so funny because the Democrats, after losing to President Trump, decided that what they really needed to do was be more off-putting.